The restaurant was a cathedral of glass and silence, perched 70 floors above the sprawling grid of Los Angeles. It was called Aura, and its patrons were the kind of people who believed they were above the city in more ways than one. The air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, smelling faintly of ozone, expensive leather, and the ghost of seared scallops. For the staff, it was a nightly tightrope walk over a canyon of egos. For Clara Hayashi, it was purgatory in a starched white apron. For 3 years, she had perfected the art of invisibility. She moved with a liquid economy of motion, her footsteps swallowed by the plush charcoal carpet. Her thick dark hair, a legacy from a grandmother she tried not to think about, was scraped into a bun so severe it pulled at the corners of her eyes. She kept her face a placid mask of professional neutrality, a skill honed by necessity. She could pour a $2,000 bottle of Screaming Eagle without a tremor, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. It was a strange, disembodied existence. She was an essential function, but not a person. Tonight, the gravitational center of the restaurant was a large, crescent-shaped booth in the corner, a throne of white leather occupied by Veronica Ronnie Croft. Ronnie Croft was not old money. She was a geyser of new money that had erupted from the arid landscape of commercial real estate development. She was loud in every sense of the word. Her dress was a sequined inferno of gold. Her laughter was a weaponized shriek, and her opinions were delivered like demolition orders. At 52, she had the taut, unlined face of a woman who battled gravity with a checkbook and a team of cosmetic surgeons. She was flanked by her usual coterie of sycophants, a slick, nervous lawyer named Marcus, and a younger, vapid social media influencer named Tiffany, whose entire job seemed to be laughing at Ronnie's jokes and documenting the meal for her followers. But the true prize at the table, the reason for this entire ostentatious display, was the woman sitting quietly at the end of the booth. Mrs. Satomi Tanaka was the antithesis of Ronnie Croft. In her late 60s, she wore a simple but exquisitely tailored kimono of deep indigo silk, its pattern a subtle tracery of silver cranes. Her hair was a neat, elegant chignon of steel and silver, held in place by a single, unadorned tortoiseshell comb. She radiated a stillness that was more powerful than all of Ronnie's noise. Mrs. Tanaka was the chairwoman of the Tanaka Foundation, a colossal Japanese cultural and industrial entity with roots stretching back to the Edo period. They were known for producing some of the world's most coveted ceramics and lacquerware, but their true business was legacy. Ronnie Croft wanted the foundation to be the primary investor and cultural anchor for her magnum opus, a monstrous, gleaming retail and condominium complex she planned to build by leveling 6 square blocks of LA's historic Little Tokyo. Clara had served the table 4 times, refilling water glasses, delivering an amuse-bouche, presenting the wine. Each time, Ronnie had treated her like a piece of furniture that moved. Mrs. Tanaka, however, had met her eyes once, a brief, startlingly perceptive glance, and had given a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "And the beauty of it, Satomi-san," Ronnie was booming, mispronouncing the honorific with blissful ignorance, "is that we're not just building shops, we're building an experience. We'll have a state-of-the-art digital museum of Japanese culture. Interactive. The kids will love it. Much better than those dusty old-fashioned shops you have there now." Mrs. Tanaka took a delicate sip of her tea, her expression unreadable. "Tradition has its own value, Croft-san. It is the root from which new things can grow. Without the root, the branch is merely a stick." Her English was perfect, accented with a crisp Tokyo precision. Ronnie waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelets clattering. "Oh, tradition, of course. We'll have plenty of tradition. We're keeping the big gate. But let's be honest, progress is progress. You have to clear out the old to make way for the new. That's just good business." Across the table, a man who had been quiet for most of the meal shifted uncomfortably. Daniel Sterling was the lead architect on Ronnie's project. He was younger, perhaps in his late 30s, with a thoughtful face and the weary eyes of a man trying to reconcile his artistic integrity with a very large paycheck. He'd seen the plans for Little Tokyo. He knew clearing out the old meant evicting families who had run businesses there for generations. Businesses like the one Clara's family was about to lose. Clara felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her family shop, Hayashi Antiques and Restoration, was one of those dusty, old-fashioned shops. For 3 generations, they had mended the broken treasures of their community. Her grandfather had been a master of kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer, mixed with powdered gold, silver, or platinum. The philosophy was that the piece was more beautiful for having been broken, its history part of its new form. Her grandmother still practiced the tea ceremony in the small room behind the shop, but the rent was tripling, the eviction notice was pinned to the wall, and her father's pride was cracking just as surely as the teacups he no longer had the heart to mend. Clara's wages from Aura were a single fraying thread holding them back from the abyss. It was then that Ronnie's gaze, sweeping the room for validation, landed on a decorative pedestal near her booth. On it sat a single beautiful piece of raku-ware ceramic, a vase with an iridescent, unpredictable glaze, part of the restaurant's carefully curated decor. A cruel, theatrical idea began to form behind her eyes. She wanted to demonstrate her point to the quiet, obstinate Japanese woman. She wanted to show her what things were really worth. She snapped her fingers, a sound as sharp and vulgar as a firecracker in a library. "Waitress, you!" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Being singled out by a table like this was a prelude to disaster. She approached, her hands clasped behind her back. "Yes, madam." "This vase," Ronnie said, gesturing at the ceramic piece with a gold-tipped fingernail. "What do you think it's worth?" Clara glanced at the piece. She recognized the style, the deliberate imperfections, the deep, smoky finish. It was beautiful. I couldn't say, madam. It's a lovely piece." "Lovely," Ronnie scoffed. "It's a pot. It's mud that's been put in a fire. Its only value is what someone is willing to pay for it. See, that's what you don't understand, Satomi-san. In America, we don't get sentimental about old things. We value what's new, what's next." She looked from the vase to Clara, a nasty smirk spreading across her face. "This girl, for instance, she's here to serve us. That's her function. Her value is her hourly wage, right?" The table was silent. Daniel Sterling looked down at his plate, a flush creeping up his neck. Mrs. Tanaka watched Ronnie, her placid expression finally showing a flicker of something cold and sharp, like the glint of steel beneath silk. Ronnie wasn't finished. She was building to a crescendo. Fueled by expensive wine and the thrill of her own power, she made her move. "Watch." With a swift, deliberate motion, she reached out and shoved the ceramic vase. It tilted, hung in the air for a heart-stopping second, and then crashed to the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. A collective gasp echoed through the hushed dining room. The sound of the breaking pottery was an act of violence, a desecration of the restaurant's serenity. Clara flinched as if she'd been struck. The manager, a perpetually panicked man named Mr. Dubois, began scrambling towards them, his face a mask of horror. Ronnie Croft leaned back in her booth, a triumphant glint in her eye. "See? It's nothing, just broken pieces. We'll pay for it. $1,000? 2? It's meaningless. You can always buy a new one." She looked directly at Mrs. Tanaka, delivering her closing argument. "That's progress." But she had made a catastrophic miscalculation. She thought she was giving a lesson on value. She had no idea she had just handed her opponent the perfect weapon. The room was frozen. Mr. Dubois was stammering apologies, trying to usher a busboy with a dustpan forward. But Clara didn't move. She was staring at the scattered shards on the carpet. She saw the clean breaks, the beautiful, complex glaze now fractured. And in that moment, the years of forced invisibility, of swallowing her pride, of hiding the very essence of who she was, fell away. She thought of her grandfather's hands dusted with gold powder. She thought of his voice explaining that a scar was a mark of history, not ruin. She looked at Ronnie Croft's smug, cruel face. Then she looked at Mrs. Tanaka's impassive one, and she understood. This wasn't a business negotiation. It was a test of character. Ignoring her frantic manager, Clara walked to the site of the wreckage. She didn't bend. In a single fluid movement that stunned the onlookers with its grace, she knelt onto the floor, her knees sinking into the plush carpet. It was not the posture of a servant. It was the posture of a devotee at a shrine. With infinite care, she began to pick up the larger pieces of the broken vase. Her fingers, which had expertly served wine all night, now moved with the reverence of a curator handling a priceless artifact. She laid them carefully on a clean linen napkin she'd taken from a service stand. Ronnie Croft watched, momentarily confused. What the hell is she doing? I said we'd pay for it. Get the vacuum. Clara ignored her. When she had gathered all the visible pieces, she looked up, not at Ronnie, but directly at Mrs. Tanaka. And then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried across the silent room with perfect clarity. And it was not in English. Morinaya, she said, the Japanese word for the deep regret concerning waste. It was more than a word. It was a cultural concept, a philosophy. Koareta toki, mono wa owari dewa arimasen. Atarashi hajimari des. When it is broken, a thing is not at its end. It is at a new beginning. A flicker of profound shock crossed Mrs. Tanaka's face. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Clara. The other people at the table, Ronnie, Marcus, Tiffany, even Daniel, were utterly lost, excluded by a barrier of language and meaning they could not breach. Clara continued, her Japanese formal and elegant, the kigo, the respectful, honorific language she had learned at her grandmother's knee. It was a language she hadn't spoken in years, a part of herself she had tried to bury in her quest to be more American, less visibly different. But it came back to her now, as natural as breathing. Konokizu wa haji dewa naku rikishi desu, she said, gently touching the sharp edge of a large shard. This scar is not a shame, but a history. Kogan de tsugu koto de, fukanzensa no naka ni utsukushii o mitsukeru koto ga dekimasu. Sore wa wabi-sabi no kokoro desu. By mending it with gold, we can find beauty in its imperfection. It is the heart of wabi-sabi. The mention of wabi-sabi, the quintessential Japanese aesthetic of finding beauty in transience and imperfection, was a key turning a lock. Mrs. Tanaka's placid mask dissolved completely, replaced by an expression of intense, focused interest. She responded in Japanese, her voice sharp and inquisitive. Anata wa kintsugi oshite imasu ka? You know of kintsugi? Hi, Tanaka-sama, Clara replied, using the highest form of address. Sofu wa shokunin deshita. Watashi wa kare no waza o mite sodachimashita? Yes, Mrs. Tanaka. My grandfather was a master craftsman. I grew up watching his art. The two women were now in a world of their own. They were no longer a waitress and a potential investor. They were two people connected by a shared cultural language, a deep understanding of aesthetics and philosophy that Ronnie Croft, with all her billions, could never hope to comprehend. Ronnie's face had transformed from smug triumph to a mottled, ugly confusion. What is going on? What is she saying? Speak English, she demanded, her voice shrill. Daniel Sterling was watching, mesmerized. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the scene. He saw the shift in power, as absolute and sudden as a change in tide. He saw the quiet, profound respect in Clara's posture, the genuine, deep engagement on Mrs. Tanaka's face. He was witnessing a masterclass in communication, and Ronnie Croft was failing spectacularly. Mrs. Tanaka held up a hand, silencing Ronnie without even looking at her. She addressed Clara one last time in Japanese. Anata no namae wa? What is your name? Hayashi Clara to Mushimasu, she replied. My name is Clara Hayashi. Mrs. Tanaka nodded slowly, a deep, meaningful gesture. Then she turned her gaze to Ronnie Croft. The warmth was gone. Her eyes were chips of obsidian. She spoke in crisp, clear English, her voice dangerously soft. You have mistaken destruction for strength, Croft-san. You have mistaken noise for substance, and you have mistaken service for servitude. This young woman, she said, gesturing towards Clara, who was still kneeling respectfully with the broken pieces, has shown more character and understanding of true value in the last 5 minutes than you have in this entire evening. Ronnie's jaw dropped. Her face, stretched taut by cosmetic procedures, couldn't quite form a full expression of outrage, but her eyes blazed with it. Now hold on a minute. That's a waitress. I'm your business partner. No, Mrs. Tanaka said, the word as final as a closing gate. You are not. The Tanaka Foundation will not be investing in your project. We do not build on ruins. We help cultivate gardens. She rose from the booth with a fluid grace that belied her age. Her aides, who had been sitting silently at a nearby table, immediately rose with her. Mrs. Tanaka paused and looked down at Clara. Hayashi-san, she said, the name now laced with respect. I would be very interested to see your grandfather's work. Perhaps you will allow me to visit your family's shop. Clara looked up, her own eyes wide with disbelief. Hai, hikari no eiku de gozaimasu? Yes, it would be my honor. As Mrs. Tanaka and her entourage swept out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of stunned silence, Ronnie Croft's fury finally found its target. Her face was a mask of incandescent rage. She pointed a trembling, gold-nailed finger at Clara. You, she shrieked, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. You are fired. You think you're so clever? You just cost yourself a job, you little nobody. You're nothing. Clara slowly, deliberately rose to her feet. She held the napkin bundle with the broken pieces of the vase as if it were a royal treasure. She looked Ronnie Croft in the eye. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable dignity. No, madam, she said, her English voice calm and steady. I'm a Hayashi, and we know how to mend broken things. Without another word, she turned her back on the sputtering real estate mogul and walked away from the wreckage, not just of the vase, but of her old life. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt not broken, but whole. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Mr. Dubois, caught between the wrath of a powerful client and the restaurant's shredded decorum, officially terminated Clara's employment before she even reached the locker room. The reason cited was gross insubordination. It was a formality. Clara packed her meager belongings into her tote bag, the linen-wrapped shards of the raku-ware vase nestled carefully within. Leaving Aura for the last time felt less like a firing and more like a parole. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind her, sealing off the world of artificial chill and silent judgment. The humid, sprawling reality of the LA night felt like a liberation. As she stood on the curb waiting for the bus, a sleek, dark sedan pulled up beside her. The passenger window hummed down, revealing Daniel Sterling. His face was a mixture of apology and awe. That was incredible, he said, the word inadequate for what he'd witnessed. Can I give you a ride? Clara hesitated. He was part of Ronnie's world, the architect of the very project that threatened to destroy her own. But his eyes held none of Ronnie's malice. They held a dawning respect. She was tired, emotionally drained, and the bus ride back to her family's small apartment above the shop would take over an hour. She nodded and got in. The ride was quiet at first. Daniel navigated the concrete canyons of downtown, the city lights smearing across the windows. I have to apologize, he said finally, breaking the silence, for being part of that. Ronnie, she has a way of assuming everyone shares her worldview. You don't have to apologize for your boss, Clara said, her voice flat. She's not my boss. She's my client, he corrected gently. Or she was. I'm not sure I can continue on the project after tonight. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. What she did was ugly, and what you did, it was the opposite of ugly. He glanced at her. Where did you learn to speak like that? It was more than just language. My grandmother, Clara said, a lifetime of complicated feelings welling up. She insisted. I hated it. I wanted to be like everyone else. I thought she was trying to trap me in the past. She looked out the window at the passing city. Tonight, I think it might have saved my future. Daniel pulled up in front of the shop. The building was old, sandwiched between a noodle house and a laundromat. The sign, Hayashi Antiques and Restoration, was faded, the gold leaf peeling. Through the front window, the dim light of a single lamp illuminated cluttered shelves of ceramics, scrolls, and wooden chests. It looked less like a business and more like a museum of forgotten things. In the window, a stark white eviction notice was taped to the glass. Daniel saw it. His expression tightened. This is your family's shop? Clara nodded, a nod of shame and defiance in her throat. This is what Ronnie Croft calls dusty and old-fashioned, he said, more to himself than to her. He handed her a business card. My personal cell. Mrs. Tanaka is a serious person. She doesn't say things she doesn't mean. When she calls you, you're going to need a plan. You can't just show her a few repaired teacups. You'll be stepping into a different world. I might be able to help you navigate it. Clara took the card, skeptical. Why would you help me? You work for her. Let's just say I'm looking to invest in something with a bit more soul than a luxury shopping mall, he said. Call me, or don't. The choice is yours. He drove off, leaving Clara standing on the sidewalk, the broken pieces in her bag and a sliver of unexpected hope in her heart. The call from Mrs. Tanaka's assistant came the next afternoon. It was polite, formal, and scheduled a meeting for 2 days later at the foundation's offices. The reality of it crashed down on Clara. This was no longer a moment of righteous defiance in a restaurant. This was a high-stakes meeting with one of the most powerful cultural patrons in the world. Daniel had been right. She needed a plan. Swallowing her pride, she called him. They met at a small coffee shop, a neutral ground between their two worlds. Clara, feeling self-conscious in her jeans and t-shirt, brought a small, silk-wrapped box. Daniel arrived looking stressed but determined, carrying a tablet and a roll of blueprints. Ronnie is furious, he began, skipping the small talk. She's in full damage control. Her PR team is already spinning a narrative. They're painting you as a disgruntled, unstable employee who staged the whole thing to get attention. They're trying to poison the well before you even meet with Tanaka-san. Clara felt a chill. But that's not true. It doesn't matter, Daniel said grimly. In Ronnie's world, the truth is just a story you pay to have told, which is why we can't just react. We need our own story, a better one. He unrolled the blueprints on the table. They were his designs for Ronnie's monolithic project. This is what she wants to build. It's cold, efficient, and generic. It could be in Dubai or Shanghai or LA. It has no sense of place. He then pulled out his tablet and swiped through a series of sketches he'd clearly been working on overnight. They were completely different. He had taken the footprint of Little Tokyo, not as a lot to be cleared, but as a foundation. His designs showed the old buildings preserved, restored, and integrated with new harmonious structures. There were gardens, pedestrian walkways, artisan workshops, a culinary school dedicated to traditional Japanese cuisine, and at the center, a cultural institute and museum. This, he said, his voice filled with a passion Clara hadn't heard before, is what could be built, a living community, not a sterile monument. It honors the past while building a future. It's a project worthy of the Tanaka Foundation's name. Clara stared at the images, speechless. He had envisioned a future for her home that she had never dared to imagine. It's beautiful. It's just an idea, he said. It needs a soul. That's where you come in. He gestured to the box she had brought. What's in there? Clara carefully unwrapped the silk. Inside was a small, exquisite tea bowl. A deep crack ran down its side, but instead of being a flaw, it was a glittering river of gold, expertly mended. The kintsugi was so fine it looked like a natural vein in the ceramic. My grandfather's last piece, she said softly. He was mending it when he passed away. My father couldn't bear to finish it, so I did. Daniel picked it up with a reverence that surprised her. He traced the golden line with his finger. This is the story, Clara. Not just about mending pottery. It's a philosophy. Mending a community, honoring the breaks and scars, making it stronger and more beautiful than it was before. This is what you present to Mrs. Tanaka, not just as a craftsman, but as a visionary for your community. For the next 48 hours, they worked relentlessly. Daniel refined his architectural plans, creating stunning visual presentations. Clara, drawing on a heritage she had long suppressed, wrote a proposal. She outlined a vision for the cultural institute Daniel had designed, a place that would be a living sanctuary for arts like kintsugi, calligraphy, the tea ceremony, and more. It would be a place for masters to teach the next generation, ensuring the traditions would not die. She was not just asking for a handout to save her family's shop. She was proposing a partnership to save the soul of her entire neighborhood. The day of the meeting, Clara put on her mother's best dress, a simple navy blue sheath. She twisted her hair not into the severe bun of a waitress, but into a soft, low chignon reminiscent of her grandmother's. She carried the golden seamed tea bowl in its silk wrapping. When Daniel picked her up, he simply nodded, an expression of profound approval in his eyes. "You look like a Hayashi," was all he said. The Tanaka Foundation's offices were a world away from Ronnie Croft's glass and chrome headquarters. They were in a discreet building in Beverly Hills, the interior a masterpiece of Japanese minimalism, wood, stone, and light. Mrs. Tanaka received them not in a boardroom, but in a small, serene room with a low table, overlooking a traditional Japanese garden. She did not smile, but her eyes were welcoming. She gestured for them to sit. Tea was served in priceless antique bowls. The meeting began not with business, but with a quiet appreciation of the tea. It was a test, Clara knew, a test of patience, of mindfulness, of respect for tradition. Finally, Mrs. Tanaka spoke. "I have been made aware of certain narratives concerning the events at the restaurant, Hayashi-san. I have been told you are an opportunist." Clara met her gaze without flinching. "What people say about me is their story, Tanaka-sama. I am here today to tell you mine." She unwrapped the tea bowl and placed it on the table between them. "My story is the story of this bowl. Our community, Little Tokyo, is like this. It is old and some say it is broken. People like Ms. Croft see only the cracks. They believe it should be thrown away and replaced with something new and shiny. We believe its cracks are its history, its soul. It does not need to be replaced. It needs to be mended." For the next hour, she and Daniel laid out their vision with a desperate, synchronized passion. He navigated the architectural renderings on his tablet, his voice steady as he explained the principles of harmony, of integrating modern, sustainable structures within the existing historical framework, a design philosophy he called urban kintsugi. His sterile corporate jargon was gone, replaced by the earnest language of an artist finally allowed to create from the soul. Clara, in turn, gave that soul a voice. She spoke of the living culture, of the intangible assets that could never be quantified on a balance sheet. The scent of mochi from a century-old family recipe, the precise rustle of silk in a dance class, the shared silence of a Go game played between an old master and a young child. She was not the supplicant daughter of a failing shopkeeper. She was the curator of a legacy, the fierce guardian of 1,000 small, precious things she had almost let herself forget. Mrs. Tanaka listened with an unnerving stillness, her gaze moving between them, sharp and analytical. She asked only a few questions, but each one was a blade that cut to the core of their proposal, testing its structural integrity, its financial viability, its heart. She held the golden seamed tea bowl for a long time, her thumb tracing the intricate line of the men as if reading a story written in Braille. When they had finally fallen silent, the energy of their presentation still humming in the air, a long, profound silence settled over the serene room. It stretched for what felt like an eternity, long enough for the first seeds of doubt to sprout in Clara's mind. At last, Mrs. Tanaka spoke, her voice a soft counterpoint to the city's distant hum. "The world is awash with those who know how to break things, Mr. Sterling. It is their primary talent. It is loud, it is fast, and it is often celebrated as progress." Her eyes met Daniel's, and he saw a flicker of profound shared weariness. Then her gaze shifted to Clara, softening almost imperceptibly. "It is a vanishingly rare thing to find those who understand how to mend. Mending," she continued, placing the tea bowl gently back on the polished wood table, "requires more than mere skill. It demands patience. It demands vision. And most of all, it demands a deep and abiding reverence for what was." She rose with a fluid grace, the movement a clear, unspoken signal that the audience was over. "Ronnie Croft offered me a transaction, a cold exchange of capital for property. You," she said, her eyes holding Clara's for a final, intense moment, "have offered me a legacy." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. "My team will be in touch," Mrs. Tanaka concluded, her tone shifting back to one of professional decorum. "A thorough due diligence is required. We must engage with the community, assess the feasibility of every detail. There are many, many steps on this path." She paused at the door, turning back one last time. But I will say this, it is the most compelling foundation for a partnership that I have seen in a great many years. Stepping out of the minimalist sanctuary of the Foundation's offices and back into the chaotic, sun-bleached reality of a Los Angeles afternoon felt like surfacing from a deep dive. The air was thick and warm, the sounds of traffic jarring. Clara felt a dizzying, terrifying sense of possibility. It was not a yes, but it was an invitation to begin, a flicker of a candle in a vast darkness. Ronnie Croft, however, was not a woman who allowed candles to burn in her darkness. In her world of hostile takeovers and scorched earth negotiations, defeat was not a setback. It was a personal affront, an act of war. Word of Clara and Daniel's meeting reached her through her vast network of informants before they had even finished their shell-shocked cup of coffee afterward. Her rage was not the hot, explosive shriek Clara had witnessed at the restaurant. It was something far more dangerous. It was a cold, precise fury that metastasized into a calculated, multi-front campaign of annihilation. If she could not possess Little Tokyo, she would grind it into dust and salt the earth. The first wave of the assault was legal. An army of sharp-suited lawyers, sharks from the city's most predatory firms, descended upon the small businesses of the community. They were masters of 1,000 cuts. They unearthed arcane clauses in decades-old lease agreements, challenged zoning variances, and filed a barrage of frivolous complaints with every city department from health and safety to historic preservation. Code violations, previously overlooked for years, were suddenly matters of urgent, fine-heavy enforcement. The eviction notice on the Hayashi's door was joined by a dozen others, blooming like poisonous flowers up and down the street. A miasma of fear and bureaucratic despair began to seep through the floorboards of the community. The second wave was a war of narrative. Ronnie gave an exclusive, carefully staged interview to a major financial news network. Seated in a pristine white office, she was the picture of a wrong visionary. She spoke of her deep love for Los Angeles, her desire to bring prosperity and renewal. She framed Mrs. Tanaka as a venerable but naive foreign matriarch, easily swayed by a sob story. She painted Daniel as a talented but traitorous architect who had violated his non-disclosure agreement, and Clara as a cunning, manipulative, disgruntled employee who had staged the entire restaurant incident to extort a settlement. The story was plausible, powerful, and utterly without mercy. Tabloid websites picked it up, running unflattering photos of Clara in her waitress uniform next to headlines like, "Waitress scams Japanese billionaire." The hope from their meeting with Mrs. Tanaka, once so bright, began to feel terrifyingly fragile. The Foundation's due diligence process was, by its nature, slow and meticulous. They sent quiet, observant teams to survey the neighborhood, to interview residents, to study the very fabric of the community Clara and Daniel were trying to save. But this process took weeks, and Ronnie's assault was measured in days and hours. The pressure began to fracture the community from within. At a tense town hall meeting held in the local Buddhist temple, the air thick with the scent of old wood and incense, Clara and Daniel faced a wall of anxious faces. Mr. Watanabe, the elderly owner of the pharmacy, a man who had known Clara's grandfather, stood up, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "Hayashi-chan," he said, the honorific laced with sorrow. "We all admire your courage, but we are drowning. My supplier just cut my credit line. The bank is calling about my loan. This Croft woman, she is a monster. Her buyout offer, it is a lot of money. Perhaps it is enough to start again, somewhere else, somewhere peaceful." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Clara's own father, his face etched with a familiar, weary resignation, would not meet her eyes. The dream of a revitalized Little Tokyo, a living legacy, felt like a beautiful, impossible fantasy against the grim reality of foreclosure and bankruptcy. That night, working late in the cluttered silence of the shop, surrounded by the ghosts of broken things, the weight of it all finally crashed down on Clara. Daniel was there, poring over city planning documents, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. "Maybe they're right," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. She ran a hand over a chipped porcelain vase. "Maybe I'm just being selfish. I'm asking them to fight a war they can't win, all to save... what? A memory?" Daniel looked up. He closed the laptop, the sudden silence amplifying the quiet hum of the old building. He walked over and stood beside her, not touching her, but his presence, a solid, grounding force. "You're not saving a memory, Clara," he said softly. "You're fighting for a future. Ronnie's future is a parking garage and a Gucci store. Yours is this." He gestured around the room, at the tools, the half-mended treasures, the tangible history. "It's not about sentimentality, it's about value. She knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. You reminded me of that. Don't you forget it now." His belief in her was a lifeline, but the final blow was yet to come. Ronnie's firm announced a major press conference to be held in the ballroom of a luxury downtown hotel. The invitation promised the unveiling of a new, celebrity-endorsed partner and the presentation of final incentive buyout packages to the residents and businesses of Little Tokyo. It was a public execution disguised as an act of charity, designed to corner the community, sever their hope, and force their surrender on live television. "She's going to make it a spectacle," Daniel said, his jaw tight as they read the press release. "She'll offer them life-changing money in front of 100 cameras. She'll paint them as fools for refusing, and us as the villains holding them back from prosperity." Clara looked at the golden-seamed tea bowl, which sat on a place of honor on the main counter. She thought of her grandfather's hands, patient and precise, finding the beauty in the break. He had never shied from a difficult repair. He believed the most complex fractures led to the most breathtaking results. A quiet, cold resolve solidified within her, displacing the fear. "Then we have to be there," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor. "She wants a public stage? We'll meet her on it. She wants to talk about value? We will show the world what value truly means." The day of the press conference felt like the prelude to a battle. The ballroom was a sterile expanse of corporate gray, swarming with journalists and Ronnie's sleek executive team. At the back of the room, a small, somber crowd of Little Tokyo residents huddled together, their faces a roadmap of anxiety, anger, and weary defiance. Clara and Daniel stood among them, not as leaders, but as part of the whole. Ronnie Croft took the stage to a polite smattering of applause, a vision in a severe, blood-red power suit. She was in her element, a predator smiling down upon her prey. She spoke of progress, of the inevitable march of the future, of bringing a world-class experience to an area she described with patronizing affection as charming, but tragically underrealized. The celebrity partner, a vapid pop star with more followers than records sold, was trotted out to gush about the exciting new shopping opportunities, generating a blinding storm of camera flashes. Then Ronnie moved in for the kill. "We understand that change can be frightening," she purred, her voice dripping with a sympathy that was as synthetic as the fabric of her suit. "So my firm, in the spirit of community partnership, is offering a final, one-time relocation and buyout package to every business owner and resident." She gestured to a massive screen behind her, where astronomical figures began to flash, numbers that represented an escape from debt, a chance to stop fighting. "This generous offer is on the table for the next 24 hours. It is your chance to step gracefully into the future." She was about to open the floor to questions from a pre-selected list of friendly journalists when a familiar voice spoke from the crowd. "Ms. Croft, I would like to accept your offer." A collective gasp went through the residents. It was Mr. Watanabe. He was walking slowly toward the stage, looking frail beneath the harsh television lights. Ronnie's face split into a triumphant smirk. It was a checkmate she had engineered herself, a public capitulation from within their own ranks. "Of course, Mr. Watanabe," she said, gesturing for a microphone to be brought to him. "Please tell everyone why you've made this wise decision." The old pharmacist took the mic, his hand trembling. "I am tired," he said, his voice quiet but carrying through the silent room. "My family has been here for 90 years. We survived internment. We survived recessions. But I do not think we can survive you." He looked out at his friends and neighbors, his eyes filled with apology. "I am sorry. I have no fight left." It was a devastating blow. The fragile morale of the community shattered. But before Ronnie could capitalize on the moment, Clara's voice, clear and resonant, cut through the despair. "Mr. Watanabe, Please don't apologize. All heads turned. Clara was walking down the central aisle, not with aggression, but with a sorrowful, resolute grace. Daniel was a step behind her, a silent, supportive shadow. You have nothing to be sorry for, Clara said, stopping and turning to face her community, ignoring Ronnie and the cameras completely. You are tired because you have been fighting your whole life. All of you have. Her voice grew stronger, imbued with a passion that silenced every corner of the room. And Ms. Croft is counting on that. She is counting on you being too tired to remember the value of what you have built. She turned to the stage, her gaze locking onto Ronnie's furious one. You speak of numbers on a screen, but what is the number for the feel of a grandfather's hand teaching you how to fold a dumpling? What is the price of the Festival of Oban when the spirits of our ancestors come home to these very streets? What is the value of a place where a child doesn't have to choose between being Japanese and being American, but can simply be both? This is not a financial negotiation. Clara's voice rang out, a bell of pure conviction. This is a moral one. She is offering you money. We are fighting for our soul. As two burly security guards began to advance on her, the main doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Mrs. Satomi Tanaka entered, flanked by her senior aides. But she was not alone. Behind her walked a formidable delegation. The heads of several prominent Japanese-American cultural organizations, a team of renowned urban planners from Kyoto University, and a phalanx of lawyers whose quiet confidence made Ronnie's legal pit bulls look like yapping puppies. The room fell into a silence so profound it was like a physical pressure. The cameras swiveled away from Ronnie, finding the true center of power that had just entered the room. Mrs. Tanaka moved with an unhurried, regal calm to the side of the stage, where an aide handed her a microphone. She did not acknowledge Ronnie. She spoke directly to the assembled press and the residents of Little Tokyo. The Tanaka Foundation has completed its due diligence, she announced, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. We have found Ronnie Croft's proposal to be a hollow vessel, concerned only with profit, and her methods to be dishonorable. A quiet, lethal emphasis on the final word sent a chill through the room. We have found the proposal from Hayashi-san and Sterling-san to be one of deep substance, rooted in reverence for culture, community, and history. She turned her warm, steady gaze upon the stunned faces of the residents. Therefore, the Tanaka Foundation, in partnership with the Kyoto Cultural Trust and the Japanese American Heritage Alliance, is pledging not to buy you out, but to invest in you. We will fully fund the community-led restoration and revitalization of Little Tokyo, based on the architectural vision of Mr. Sterling. We will provide modernization grants and low-interest loans to every business to ensure you do not merely survive, but thrive. And we will endow the Little Tokyo Cultural Institute, a living center for Japanese arts and heritage, to be founded and directed by Ms. Clara Hayashi, to ensure that your traditions are not a museum piece, but a vibrant legacy for generations to come. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then a single sob of relief from Mrs. Watanabe broke the spell, and the room erupted. The residents of Little Tokyo surged forward, a wave of joyous, weeping humanity. They were cheering, hugging, their faces streaked with tears of disbelief and catharsis. The reporters, sensing a story of epic proportions, swarmed Mrs. Tanaka, Clara, and a beaming Daniel. On the stage, Ronnie Croft stood utterly alone, a statue carved from ice. Her celebrity partner had vanished. Her executives avoided her gaze. Her perfectly constructed world, her entire narrative of inevitable power, had been dismantled and swept away in less than 5 minutes. Her face, a mask of taut, expensive perfection, was frozen in an expression of abject humiliation. She had tried to purchase history, only to be vanquished by a young woman who understood its immeasurable, unconquerable worth. In the heart of the joyful chaos, Clara found her father. He grabbed her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his body shaking with the force of his pride and relief. "Clara," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandfather. He is here today. I feel him. He is so proud." 1 year later. The air in Little Tokyo no longer tasted of despair, but of sawdust, wet paint, and possibility. The soundscape was a symphony of renewal, the whine of a circular saw harmonizing with the distant chime of a wind bell, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer from a newly opened artisan forge, mixing with the laughter of children from the community center. Scaffolding, draped in banners bearing the logos of the Tanaka Foundation and the Kyoto Trust, embraced the old brick buildings like a promise. It was not the cold, sterile demolition of Ronnie Croft's vision. It was a careful, loving act of mending on an architectural scale. Daniel stood on a corner, a roll of blueprints tucked under his arm, his face smudged with dust and lit with a deep, quiet satisfaction he had never known in his old life. He was no longer just an architect. He was a partner, a collaborator with an entire community. He watched as a team of master craftsmen from Japan showed local workers how to restore the intricate woodwork on the facade of the old theater, the project a living bridge between past and future. A few blocks away, in a newly renovated building that had once been a dusty, forgotten warehouse, Clara Hayashi stood before a whiteboard, leading a budget meeting. The severe waitress bun was gone, replaced by a soft chignon from which a few strands had escaped, a testament to a long day. She wore not an apron, but a simple, elegant blazer. On the door, elegant gold lettering read, Clara Hayashi, Executive Director, Little Tokyo Cultural Institute. The role was a constant, terrifying, exhilarating challenge. She was no longer just responsible for her family's shop, but for the soul she had spoken of so passionately. She spent her days negotiating with contractors, writing grant proposals, developing curriculum with elderly masters of tea ceremony and calligraphy, and mediating disputes between neighbors who had lived side by side for 50 years. Sometimes, late at night, in the silence of her new office, she felt a phantom ache for the invisibility of her old life, for the simplicity of a world that demanded nothing more from her than a steady hand with a wine bottle. But then she would walk past the classroom where young children were learning the art of shodo from a master calligrapher, their small faces screwed up in concentration, and she would know with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That evening, long after the last of the staff had gone home, she was in the Institute's main workshop. The air smelled of lacquer, clay, and wood. Daniel found her there, standing at a long workbench. He came bearing 2 steaming cups of tea in paper cups, a small, familiar ritual they had developed. "Long day?" he asked, placing a cup beside her. "The longest," she sighed, but a smile touched her lips. "The board wants to finalize the Artist-in-Residence program by Friday. Mr. Tanaka wants an update on the ceramics kiln installation, and Mrs. Ito is threatening to stage a sit-in if we don't approve her proposal for a competitive Ikebana League." He laughed, the sound warm in the quiet space. "Sounds like progress." "It is," she admitted. She looked down at the object on the workbench before her. It was the raku ware vase from the restaurant, the catalyst for everything. For months it had sat in pieces in its linen wrapping. Now, under the patient tutelage of a master craftsman the foundation had sent from Kanazawa, she was finally mending it herself. The larger pieces were joined, the golden seams already tracing a beautiful, luminous map of its trauma. She was working on the last, smallest shard. She picked up a fine brush, dipped it into the mixture of raw lacquer and powdered gold, and with a surgeon's focus, began to trace the edge of the final piece. Daniel watched her, his expression full of a quiet, profound admiration that went deeper than words. "I heard from a friend at my old firm today," he said softly. "Ronnie Croft lost the bid for that big waterfront development. The board cited reputational risk. She's selling her house in Beverly Hills." Clara didn't look up from her work, her hand perfectly steady. A year ago, that news would have felt like a victory, a triumphant final chord. Now it just felt distant. Ronnie Croft was a ghost from another life, a broken thing she had no interest in mending. Her focus was here, on this piece, on this community, on the careful, patient work of making something whole again. She fitted the final, golden-edged shard into place. It slid home with a soft, satisfying click. The vase was complete. It was no longer the perfect anonymous object that had sat on a pedestal at Aura. It was something infinitely more precious. Its scars were not flaws. They were its story, a testament to its survival, rendered in pure gold. Clara stepped back, her fingers dusty with gold, and looked at their shared creation. Daniel moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. They stood in silence for a long moment, looking not just at the mended vase, but through it, at the past year and the future stretching out before them. "You know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "it's more beautiful now." Clara picked up the tea bowl her grandfather had started, and she had finished, its own golden seam gleaming in the low light. She held it in her hands, its weight familiar, its history a part of her. "I know," she said, a deep, peaceful smile finally reaching her eyes. "That's the point. We're not meant to erase the breaks. We're meant to honor them. It's how the light gets in."